Welcome to another episode of Gamers, Developers and Scholars. I'm your host, Javier, director of the Aztec game Dream of Darkness. And joining me today are new faces. So it would be really cool for everyone to introduce each other again so that we get to hear of our different mindsets. I believe this is the best way to improve our industry, to listen from different points of view. So go ahead, Charles.
Hey, I'm Charles.
And what do you represent? Hello. Who are you?
So I am a gamer. I've been playing games for many years, most of my life, and I am also a video producer. I do video essays on games.
Next, Shelly, tell us about yourself.
Well, I am a researcher of the occult, and I have received my calling of the occult through a dream, and I've been practicing witchcraft since I was 26, and made a pact with Beelzebub. So I like to lend my knowledge of the occult and witchcraft such to the team as a way of making ideas.
Thanks a lot, Shelly. So next comes Bill. Tell us about yourself. And Amanda.
So, hey, I'm Bill. This is Amanda. We run the Deep End Games, a small studio out of just north of Boston. And we released a game called Perception about 4 years ago, and are currently working on Romancylvania, which is a mashup of, a little bit of visual novel, but also Metroidvania, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Prior to that, I was at Irrational Games, where I was a lead on the Bioshock series. And Amanda is our writer.
Yeah, so I'm the narrative director at the Deep End Games. I wrote Perception, I'm writing Romancylvania. I'm also an English teacher, so I love digging into like narrative and story and voice and whatnot. I've also written a number of books, so yeah, I'm really excited.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Next comes Bobby. Poppy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Poppy Wild, and I'm a lecturer in media and communication at Birmingham City University in the UK. So I got my PhD writing about playing World of Warcraft. Obviously there was a bit more to it than that now. But so now my publications are within the fields of post-humanism and also digital games, and so sometimes they overlap, as they did in my PhD, but some of my research is kind of more about post-humanism in other areas, and some is exploring different aspects of gaming and game experience.
Thank you so much, Poppy. Your expertise will become very relevant with the game we're commenting today. And finally comes Imre. Tell us about yourself.
Hello, I am Imre. I make games for a living, which is fantastic. I am one of the founders of Bossa Studios, which is known for physical comedy games like Surgeon Simulator. And I have, for the last a couple of years, started a new venture where we are adapting classic literature into video game. First game was Orville's Animal Farm, and we are working on a new game, very early stages pre-production of another classic book.
Thank you again, Imre.
Animal Farm in the fall, so I'm really excited. I definitely want to look into that.
Yeah, and Imre also suggested the game we're commenting today. So about the title that brings us... Go ahead, Imre.
Sorry, so I guess I should add that I am Hungarian by birth, and the developers of these games are Hungarian, so I feel attuned to their sense of writing.
Perfect. So thank you again, Imre, for recommending the game. And today we're starting the discussion around Chicken Police, Painted Red. So it is a very interesting title by the Wild Gentlemen, the developers. And as always, we can begin with this very casual way of saying what was more interesting to you. First remarks, was there something that first impression was very different, possibly in comparison with other titles?
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting is the similarities that the game bore to the Disney movie Zootopia.
Yeah.
Because the setup is basically the same. the world is like, you have the carnivores and the herbivores living together. You have the idea of sort of a society moving beyond those animalistic tendencies. But I also really like that this took it in a very different direction than that movie. Like, it would be very easy to kind of dismiss this as somebody saw Zootopia and decided to make a noir visual novel. But I like the idea of taking a piece of media that had a really interesting concept and doing something totally different with it. And so yeah, that was kind of my first impression, especially talking to the raccoon there at the diner and kind of gathering information about the world from that.
Of course. You were saying, sorry, Shelly?
I've been watching the wrong chicken police. I've been watching two chickens just break up fights in the barn. But just kidding. I did see the gameplays. But what I really liked about the game is that it actually had that Sin City movie vibe to it.
Absolutely. The film noir aesthetic has been so influential. Maybe we can begin with some background. I believe it was pioneered in the US during the Roaring 20s. It was a kind of an entire school for filmmaking. And afterwards, naturally, it was also done for so many other places. I believe even in Europe there were movies that were inspired by that aesthetic, right? Because it was also economic situation that was felt worldwide. Those 20s were hard for everyone. I really was interested in having both experts in narrative and also experts from the side of academia, because I didn't know until I read Poppy's research on it that apparently developers like myself can have a bias by pushing too much only humans, and actually, like your paper, Poppy says, on the empathic gamer, it is an opportunity when we have avatars that are different species. For example, in World of Warcraft, and I did feel that I was a bit more liberated when I could see the racism, but with different species. It was easier to have comedy around that. Even though it made sense already in the film noir era, in the 20s when these movies first appeared, it is far easier for a new audience to have these jokes making fun of each other, but with animals, naturally. But maybe, Poppy, you can tell us more about your research on this game.
Yeah, sure. So the work that I've done on empathy in particular, and thank you so much, Javier, for reading it, is exploring the relationship between the avatar and the gamer and the ways in which we are really affected by what the avatar experiences and feels. And so I've written about that in a variety of ways through, for example, and as I say, these papers were about World of Warcraft specifically, so about playing with the World of Warcraft avatar, and when you're like attacked by something, or you fall, or you're drowning, or those kinds of things, the visceral reactions that has on your body. But I also have written about that in relation to acting as well, because my background is in performance. And so I think, yeah, that aspect of how being able to explore a different subjectivity, a different kind of subject position, and feel ourselves into that position, both through the narrative, through the choices that we have, and then, as I say, through those reactions on the body. So I think what you're kind of touching on there, Javier, is that idea of how in the chicken police we've got them, as you say, kind of calling out their different breeds, and making something of that. I think for me the like weird disjuncture of it though is how it's just animal heads. And so really what we're doing a lot more of in the game is actually we're encouraged to look beyond the chicken police as chickens, because really we're anthropomorphizing all of those animals within the game. And so it's, for me, I suppose, whilst I really love the style, I love the aesthetic, I love that film noir-ness, and like as well, kind of shout out to the soundtrack as well for really kind of having that atmospheric embodiment of that. For me, it was almost kind of a bit more of a missed opportunity. Like, I would have liked to see more of the animals within the characters, if that makes sense.
Fascinating. So do you think that by anthropomorphizing the characters, so we're not really making full use of what could have been done if it had been more like, let's say, Animal Farm, for saying something quickly, in which the story does take place with animals, and each animal naturally has a different agency.
Yeah, I think, as you say, that allows... I think that adds something more to the story development, but also, from the perspective of how we then kind of relate to the characters. But I think also that's to do with the agency within the game. Like, it is very much kind of point and click, isn't it? You're not, like, although you're playing as Sonny, you're not really... you're not in control of his character development, which I think, again, kind of affects how we feel in relation to a character when we play a game.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's something that it's a very older style of kind of adventure game. It's very reminiscent of like Tex Murphy or of the old, like, I'm a huge fan of the Sam and Max games. It also kind of reminded me of that. And also, like Sam and Max, it's kind of interesting that you have the rabbit and the dog as your main characters in that. And that's rarely actually acknowledged in the games, unless it is convenient to the plot. You're just, you happen to be a 6-foot-tall dog walking around in, wherever, and it's just accepted, even though everyone else is human.
That's an interesting point, and I think that one of the differences between this and Sam and Max, and I love Sam and Max, I love that series, but I think what really makes this interesting is I don't feel like these are personified. I feel like these are humans who are, oh, this person's prickly and or this person's, a gorgeous being, but oh, she'll careful, she'll scratch you. I feel like they just took the tropes and animalified them. I kind of felt like it was the opposite. I think it's like they're writing these characters as humans with the racial undertones, as you pointed out, and they just sort of found what suited. Like, you think about the the homeless man in front of the diner.
Yeah, right? It's a fly.
He's a cast off. He's a fly. He means nothing. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think that
the innocent, girl Deborah in the beginning, she was a doe.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I feel like that I don't know what their process was. It's a fascinating game, but I feel like they were like, hey, what animal is going to best suit this? Or, again, I don't know what the process was.
To a degree, though. Like, I don't immediately assume chickens as, like, very intuitive.
But they're...
Which makes it funny. But, like, they packet things. Like, so maybe that's like a joke.
What do roosters do? They peck the shit out of each other. They're territorial. They preen. They all that sort of thing. And so, to me, it was like... And you think about these kind of cops, they're not that tough. Right, and you got the bloodhound. You got all. So to me, it was more. I think we'll see how it plays out, but I feel like that's more appropriate than we may think. Plus, the weakest connection.
Sure.
Everyone else is like, of course, you're a bug.
Yeah,
or this,
obviously.
Yeah. I don't know.
This is a very interesting angle. So sorry, a very interesting question, by the way. That did it start with the animals or did it start with humans? But knowing, I know some of the creators, and I know that they just wanted to tell a story. Like, they had this story in their head that they wanted to tell, and then they just found the means to do that. But I think that the experiences, and I'm sure you all experience is that when you're writing the story, that at some point, the story and the characters take over. And then you feel like in the beginning you think you're making a point, and at some point, the characters are making the point, not you. I think at least the good writing I know when I feel like something is powerful is when it starts taking over, and my job is to just write down. I'm not writing it anymore. It's a weird out-of-body experience. So in this case, and I'm sorry for the pun, but the game has a lot of it. I don't know if the chicken or the egg came first. So I don't know if the idea of looking like animals or it became that. I suspect it's both.
So here's the thing, like, this is a very American folklore sort of concept. This is something that is very, very steeped in traditions, both American and like British, for example. You see the idea of using animals to teach a lesson or something like that, and you usually see it in more of a kid's context. But I like that in this case it's used in a much more adult game. But like speaking to the chickens, if you've ever been on a farm and I've been on a few, roosters are the police. They patrol the grounds. They look after things, and that's one of the functions that the rooster is going to serve. It's partly for mating, and partly because the rooster is going to protect the chickens from low-level threats. As you mentioned in game, they're not particularly tough, and so when a coyote comes in, the rooster isn't necessarily a huge help, although roosters are a whole lot meaner than people give them credit for and a whole lot tougher. I've seen them run off large, fully grown men who are in some cases armed. But yeah, like, it's... That, I think, like I said, I can't speak to what comes first, but actually the rooster thing is kind of inspired because of how they interact on a farm. And I think that, I don't know that this is a game that necessarily lends itself to that kind of much, much deeper analysis where we have to look at why everybody is exactly the animal they are. I think that at some point you just kind of go with it. But I definitely think that they had some ideas and some inspiration from real life. And again, with this being a very old concept, I think it's a lot more traditional. I don't know that it's necessarily used as novelty in the same way that some games do it, where it's just everybody's a person but they're an animal. I think that it has a lot more of that traditional root to it. Indeed. Where there is some meaning behind it.
There is also helping the visual style. We don't get, let's say, a caricature, toonish version of an animal. It is a more or less realistic head of each of the different species. So it's supposed to be serious. This is at least one of the reactions that we can get when we see this level of realism in games. Naturally, the juxtaposition of the story and seeing a rooster in love, or at least entranced with the singer, well, naturally that gives, I believe, a very fresh comedic effect that at least I haven't seen that many games like that. In that sense,
but I suppose we do see that. Sorry, I was just
go ahead,
say,
Poppy.
We do see that in a lot of other media. So obviously we've mentioned Zootopia here, but if we look at all of our media that we consume that draws on animals as characters, I think, that's the other thing that, we do have, as Charles says, that kind of drawing on real life characteristics, or I would say perceived characteristics of animals. There's a lot in how we anthropomorphize animals anyway, not just in media, but, we talk about, our dogs being lonely, and, we decide what animals have more value in the world. So the idea of having the homeless fly makes sense from a human perspective, because as humans, we don't like flies. So I think, although, and don't get me wrong, like, I think the game is really, really interesting. I think and I also think the different things that we've said about it just aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Like, yes, it can have come partly from, like, the real world inspiration of roosters pecking each other, partly from other media influences. But we can see already how, as we've all said, like, it kind of makes sense to us why certain characters are personified by a certain animal, but we are still looking at them as not just as an animal. We're looking at them as more than that. We're looking beyond that. And I think part of what expresses that really interestingly in the game is the human body and the hand gestures. And for me, that was one of the most interesting things, how that changed, like, during the course of questioning, from, like, the hands like this to like this to like this. And
I love this one.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. The kind of human acting element that went in that. And you imagine if you're a human with a mask on and you were wearing a chicken mask and you had this dialogue, you can imagine you would be kind of like trying to perform it in some way. So yeah, sorry, I was just going to say that's just like another thing that I thought was really interesting in that merger of the human and the animal.
Well, some of the animals' faces can be more expressive than others. Like, take the crow girl, for example. Like, you can't emote from a crow face. Like, beaks don't, they just don't work that way. Whereas, the bunny could be a little bit more expressive, like with the eyes and the face. So I think that it's interesting to see the different sort of levels of how much they can actually get across from that face as opposed to the body.
Yeah.
And there are very few... Go ahead, Charles.
Oh, I was going to say that's one of the big problems that me and a number of people had with the recent live-action-ish Lion King movie was by going with those super realistic animals, you sometimes lost some of that expression and you lost some of what made the cartoony Lion King work, because these emotions don't necessarily translate well to certain wild animals. Where I think Chicken Police did it really well is because they weren't trying to remake something, they were able to actually use their characters in very intentional and appropriate ways, and so I think that kind of helped, and you can use the facial structure of the animal to even factor into their personality.
Absolutely.
I feel like it's also that, remember that film noir, a great deal it happened work around limitations in production. A lot of the lighting and camera angles and all of that were to cover up problems. It's like Jaws. All his robot sharks were broken, so he created one of the most suspenseful films ever made. It's the same here. Noir was created that way. And let's remember, this is an indie team, right? This is an Eastern European indie team. They have a much bigger story than they want to tell and want to work around it. And I kind of think that they've been very clever about it, because in the process they created this amazingly unique art style, right? I can't think of any other games looking like this, and it's quite important nowadays, right? That you look at a single screenshot, you cannot confuse this game with any other game. You just can't. And I think that's extremely powerful. And it comes with limitations, but it also meant that their production budget is significantly, smaller. I happen to know that originally they wanted to make it a pixel art game, and that would have been much more expensive. And that would have gotten lost with all the other pixel art games. So it's interesting to see how production and realities and creative goals sometimes, struggle with each other, and that struggle creates something amazing that maybe the creators themselves did not see at the beginning.
Absolutely. That's why it's very useful to have constraints around us. When there are no constraints, when, let's say, in those few occasions you have unlimited resources, unlimited time, unlimited something, it becomes wasteful. And on the contrary, apparently in this case, like you were saying, Imre, fortunately the story was more important, and they did not apparently change the story. In contrast, they found a format that allowed them to tell with limited resources that story, and that's how this very refreshing art style appeared. That happens very often in our industry, and sadly we don't show it enough, and that's why many colleagues always try to push more pixels into the screen.
Yeah, well,
I think it's a really great point that I think one of the most successful parts of this game is that it does embrace its own constraints, and I think noir is an exceptional fit for games, whereas especially a narrative game where, let's face it, they star Muppets, right? When it comes down to it, like, most games are trying to get all this emotion across, and this game not only plays around with emotions and tones so well, like it goes to comedy and it gets serious at times, it takes on racial issues, but I think most importantly, you're talking about Muppets. You can either try and run away from that and do something like, not to knock them or whatever, something like Kojima, where it's like, we're gonna just throw endless millions of dollars to make these people feel real, right? And it's like, why? You're competing with movies. It's not gonna feel nearly as good. So this is very disciplined in the fact that, like, it knows exactly what each character can and can emote. You talk about the Roosters. We talked about that scene, the dance scene, right? The dance number. And it's just the right moment for it to break the tension. So I think, again, one of the pitfalls I always see narrative games fall into is they don't respect the player's time. On and on and on. And noir naturally is terse. It's like, get to the point, and the characters are like, they're not going to let you in their bubble, and they're standoffish. And so everything about this is incredibly it's embracing those constraints, it's embracing the genre, it's using all its strengths. I think it's one of the most tight games I've played in a long time.
Right. I mean, I love narrative and I love narrative games, but I do often feel like, like click, click, click. But with this, I'm like hanging on everything.
It's like they're using every word, and it's like there's nothing wasted here.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think also helps.
Charles. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I think also helps is that they're hitting all the high points of noir. It's all of the tropes that we kind of expect, and not in a bad way. like I said, it's kind of like the whole Zootopia thing. Yeah, it's using the world as Zootopia, but it's using it in a new and interesting way. I think that when it comes to a narrative like this, it's a narrative that we've seen before, but that works to its benefit in that our brain kind of helps to fill things in. We know what emotions these characters are trying to explain, because you have the classic grizzled alcoholic detective in the cigar-stained room who's picking up the case, and we know that. We've seen that 1,000 times, but now he's a chicken, so it's at least something a little bit new, And again, I don't want to be dismissive of it, but he sees the bar singer in the room at the club. Again, something we've seen 1,000 times before in noir, but because I like that there's this weird aversion, I think, to doing things that have been done before, but if you take things that have been done before and you do them in a new and interesting way, it comes across as fresh. Not everything has to be an original idea. And I think that there's this idea that if you're building on something that already exists, you're just copying it or ripping it off. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that's something that gaming as an industry and in general just media needs to overcome. Is it's okay to do something that's been done before but do it well.
Yeah, that's why I really Go ahead, Poppy.
Sorry, you go.
Please.
I was just going to say, really kind of like picking up on what you're saying as well in terms of how it does what it does so well, that I think also like massive props to the voice actors who are superb throughout. And I've just done a super quick Google Chicken Police voice actors, and the first link that comes up is from Handy Games and says, every character in Chicken Police is fully voiced by professional actors and veterans of the industry. You might recognize Kerry Shale, Sunny, Jules Dijon, Natasha, Shay, Matheson, Marty, and others from big titles like The Witcher, Mass Effect, Horizon Zero Dawn, or Mirror's Edge. And so, these are, consummate professionals who do a fantastic job. Sorry, Javier, back to you.
No worries. It is actually very good for us to know. When you, like Imre was saying, when you have this focus, when you're very disciplined, it frees up some resources so that you can, in the features that you have selected, you can there pour so much quality now. In this case, for example, with our voice actors, in how polished this script is. It is very useful to contrast it with another successful game that we commented before, Charles, Pathologic, for example. Pathologic, an indie darling, but it is the exact opposite, a text that is unedited. So, like Amanda was saying, it's rambling and rambling without, taking into consideration the time of the player. And it was, an experience by itself, a very original experience. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah. Well, and like whenever I'm doing video essays, a lot of times the three questions I always ask is a game any good? Did I have fun with it? And would I recommend it to others? And I like that as opposed to a rating scale, because those three questions tell you what you need to know about should you pick up this game. I've talked before about games that I really like, but which I would never recommend to anybody else. Like you mentioned Kojima earlier, I would never recommend Death Stranding to anybody. I enjoy it, but it's not like, how would you pitch? You're a post-apocalyptic courier, building roads, fighting ghosts, you throw urine grenades at them. I don't know, it's weird, but it's great.
Yeah, real?
Yeah, that's real. That's how you fight the ghosts. Yeah,
that is so on point for on brand for Kojima.
Yeah, but yeah, and so like it's a game that I love because I really like the visuals of. But like I said, I it's not something I would say everybody needs to go out and play. And honestly, in a way, Chicken Police is kind of that way. I think that it has a lot of really good noir tropes to it. I think that it has a really unique visual style, and we all really enjoyed it. And I think that it's probably got some of that universal appeal. But a lot of the problem with the industry right now is games want that universal appeal, and a lot of times wind up losing their personality in the process. They drop the things that are a little bit more controversial.
I actually got on my phone while playing in the first hour and messaged 3 people being like, go play Chicken Police. Like, it's great. So like I had the opposite reaction. I was like, this is something.
But it's a really good point. I totally know what and I love that system. I love that approach, because I think my biggest complaint right now with the industry is just about like, that's not what they are. That's not what I think they should be, or whatever. And I just like, listen. My whole thing is like, I appreciate the bits and pieces from everything, and I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge that it's not forever. Not every game is for everyone, and we're not past that part of all the growth we've had in the industry. We're still not past the part of like I appreciate that the Souls series exists. I can't for the life of me get into them. I've tried at least 10 times with each game to sit down and and I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna disparage those games. I appreciate what they do, and I appreciate their craft, and they're phenomenal games. They are not for me, and that's fine. But I don't think they suck.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well,
I mean, in the middle of it, you might be like,
yeah.
But...
So anyway, I think that's a really good way of approaching it.
Well, the thing is that there's a natural kind of ebb and flow to the industry. Like, I think that what we're seeing right now is hopefully kind of the tail end of the idea of everything has to be a big blockbuster. You have a lot of companies that treat a game like if it doesn't sell, 7 million units in the first 2 hours, it is automatically a failure and we're going to write it off. There was a time where, for example, EA or Bethesda would publish games by volume, and you would see, we're going to publish a horror game, we're going to publish a shooter, we're going to publish an RPG, and even if one individual project doesn't necessarily make it massive, we've catered to those fans, and the big projects will kind of support us. And I think that, like, Microsoft is starting to do that a little bit more again. But, you had that whole phase where Activision Blizzard and EA, it's like, we're going to throw all of our money into one big project, and it needs to sell X millions of units, or else it's a failure. We're going to restructure everything, and we're going to, lay off half the team. And I much prefer that other, more diverse side of the industry where it's like, here we're going to throw out a lot of different things, and that way everybody kind of gets their fix.
Absolutely.
The thing is that I've been around the industry. I remember that an extremely cocky American publisher told me that this is a shit idea because he can't visualize it on the shelves in Walmart. And I hated that guy, and I hated him particularly because he was right. Like, at that time, you couldn't, there was no digital distribution, there was none of that. So you had to aim for going for the widest one, because you had to. And how different it is today that with a small team, with clever, you don't have to serve that huge audience. You can make a point, and you can make an artistic point. Nonetheless, I struggle with reviews. I really do. And I think everyone who has touched on this, I remember many, many, many years ago, it was the beginning of music games. And a very, very successful music game was rated like a 3 out of 10 by a famous reviewer, and it made me so angry because the review wasn't even, I don't like it. The review was like, this is a piece of shit. And I was like, how can you not get it? Like, how can you not get that you are backwards compatibility? Like, not the future. You just don't see the future. And that differentiation is that it is a game for me, and it is a game good at what it's doing. And I think that second one is really hard. That's what professional reviewing comes in. Good reviewing comes in, when I can review something even if it's not my thing. I absolutely recognize the greatness of the Soul series, and just like Bill, I can't get into it. It doesn't mean that I, as a game designer, don't look at it. I can see that it's a masterpiece, right? I can see that, and also at the same time not enjoy it. And going back what I think Amanda said, I think that cannot be repeated enough, that how respectful the game is of our time. This game could have been 20 hours, and it wasn't, and I'm so grateful, because here I felt like every conversation there was something which was worthwhile. There was a good joke, there was a good character, there was in fact every conversation I felt there was multiple good things. It wasn't drawn out. I felt that there was enough cool moments per minute, while in some other games don't. So I really appreciated that.
And
characters as well. There were a lot of characters that didn't they could have just been like, in so many games you'll talk to a character and be like, why are they even there? In this one, everything added to the world or the story or the characterization. It wasn't just like this throwaway NPC being like, I don't know, there's so many games with throwaway NPCs.
I think that they also do a really good job layering the information, where if you want to dig out more, peel more layers of the onion away, you can. And it's pretty clear where that is, but they do a good job from an information architecture perspective, being like, hey, this is additional. Like, if you want to go back and click on this some more, what a lot of games would do is just like, here's a giant list of all the conversations you can have, and it's like, it's impossible to tell what's secondary, and just let me enjoy some more and dig some more. So again, every aspect respect.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Charles.
But yeah, no, and I mean, I really like that in sort of detective or investigative games where you feel like an investigator, where it's like, I'm going to pull the information that I need out of this, and maybe you have certain facts that aren't relevant to the crime, but it's teaching you how to word questions, how to play people, things like that. You know, in Chicken Police, you're selecting from a menu, so it's a little bit different. But, you know, it's something that games like LA Noire have tried to emulate and things like that. You know, the sense of how do you get to the core of what's actually going on. But yeah, like, the thing is, like, one of the things you were saying, Imre, was I've talked a lot before, and I won't bore anybody here with it. You can watch our earlier episodes. I've talked about how Metacritic and reviews kind of ruin gaming, honestly. Like, it creates this... Yeah. It tries to boil everybody's complex opinions, whether valid or not, down to a single number, and this is how successful a game was, and this is how good it is. And I've heard people even argue online that it's like an objective metric, and it's not at all. You know, you had the whole kerfuffle when it was Jim Stephanie Sterling who reviewed Breath of the Wild a 7 out of 10, and it knocked the Metacritic score down so that it was no longer the highest reviewed game on the website, and people started review bombing and giving death threats, and it turned into a whole big thing. But I also think that there needs to be an acknowledgement within the industry that you have different industries within this. You know, so I'm not in academia, I'm not in game publishing. I used to work 2 factory jobs. I now work as a government contractor. The gamers who I engage with bought a PS5 at launch. They bought about 5 games, and that's probably about all the games they're going to get, or maybe 2 or 3 more during the console cycle. They bought Call of Duty, they bought, you know, the big games to play online with friends, and that's all they're really going to engage with gaming. And that's a very different aspect to it than a lot of the people who we talk to on the show, or a lot of the people who, you know, we talk to on Javier's server, who are actually wanting to engage more with games, who are playing indie games. If I recommend a game that's on itch or Game Jolt, like, nobody's gonna know what I'm talking about. About the most indie that a lot of these people get is something like Undertale, which, very good game, but it went very sort of mainstream. Everybody kind of knows that name. And if it's not a household name, they're not really gonna risk any time on it, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that we have to kind of acknowledge that those are 2 sort of separate realms. And I'm very glad that they exist.
I recently had this experience that, like, almost within 24 hours, I met 2 people, and both of them described themselves as hardcore gamers. One of them said, I play every match-3 game out there. The person said, I am a hardcore gamer. And then the other person was, I'm a hardcore gamer, and I've been to the place. They have all of the consoles and every single version of FIFA and every single Call of Duty. And they have a shelf, and every single one of them just lined up on disc. All of them, all the consoles are there, and it's like, I'm a hardcore gamer. And both of them are hardcore gamers. They are, like, because that's how they feel.
Absolutely.
And if they ask them to review each other's games, they would give us 1 out of 10. And that's fine.
Yeah, in that sense, it's very good to understand, like I believe we do in our conversation, the context of our industry, how it has different audiences inside it. It is very similar to, let's say, when movies appeared at the very beginning, there were people who did identify themselves as film watchers, and there were also the people who specifically preferred talkies. The first movies that had audio. Naturally, as time went on, those terms disappeared because eventually almost everyone watched movies. We don't necessarily say, oh, I only like or watch talkies. In the same way, I believe games are in this moment when we're still in the Cambrian explosion, like Bill was saying. We still have, fortunately, lots of different formats. We still have lots of different people who play. However, we haven't reached that critical mass when, in comparison with movies, everyone plays games. Even, for example, the UK, which I believe has half of the population already playing games, still there are people who do identify as players, as gamers, and people who don't, who have never touched a title. So that's why I believe sometimes the reviews sadly help the people who are not living games every day of their life. And that's why there are naturally better and worse reviews, more informed, that don't reduce things, as Charles was saying, to a number. And it is still very useful to listen to them. Sadly, Ava, for example, who is a reviewer, is not with us today, because it will be very interesting to hear his opinion on that maybe next episode. Go ahead, Imre.
I think one of the things I love about this industry is that we can have these conversations. You know, I have the honor of being part of the BAFTA Games Awards committees across many years now, and I love these kind of conversations. And for example, I presented to you that if you look at, to me, in my head, the closest game, obviously L.A. Noire was mentioned already, but to me the two closest game to this is Disco Elysium. In a lot of ways, I think it overlaps, and it's clearly Disco Elysium. It was a runaway success and well deserved. It's a great game. And then the other one is Backbone. Backbone came out not that long ago. I think it's a few months ago it came out, and that is a noir investigative game, which is a pixel art and there are animals. You know, and both of those games are someone's favorite, and both of those games are gonna have people who hate them. And we could be sad about it, especially if a game you like is badly reviewed or vice versa. But I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely splendid that you can go down this rabbit hole and find this super niche, and you're gonna find some great games. And I know as a developer, I can tell you from other developers here feel the same way probably, it's terrifying. You can find your super niche and you think, I found my extra niche, and then you find 5 games in the niche. That's terrifying. But as a customer, I love it. I love that I can find these games and I can recommend them, and I can find the nichest of the niche, and I can find a friend who said, you never played an adventure game, but I know you love that film. This game is just like that. Like, we can do that. I feel like that proves that as an art form, we really get it there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think that...
Sorry, you go ahead, Charles.
Okay. I do think that something that we do need to accept in the industry is that there's not really any place for this kind of weird smug elitism that I think a lot of gamers have, where it's like, you mentioned people saying, oh, I'm a hardcore gamer because I play X, or like I've heard people just outright dismissively saying, oh, I'll go back to Call of Duty if you don't like whatever narrative-driven experience. And it's like, there's nothing... well, I take that back. There are things that are wrong with Call of Duty, but there's nothing wrong with enjoying certain games or wrong with enjoying certain genres, you know. And like, I did a video on Call of Duty, even though I normally do more sort of obscure or older titles, like, because I feel like there is an actual discussion to be had. And I feel like if you're enjoying the game, then who's to say who is hardcore and who isn't, you know, and who's to say what games are worthy and what isn't.
There's a really big difficulty as well in terms of how gamers identify in terms of the gender difference. So generally there's been like a lot of research done on how people who identify as hardcore gamers generally identify as male, and then people who identify as casual gamers are generally identify as women. And that's not, let's like be honest, that's not because more hardcore gamers are men and more casual gamers are women. What that is because of is exactly as you say, Charles, there's the kind of discourses within the industry, within the field and within the medium that suggests to people that in order to be a hardcore gamer there has to be some kind of qualification there. And that's grossly problematic from a number of reasons, because it enforces certain kind of hierarchies of wealth as well. Like, in order to be a hardcore gamer, I have to have the best spec, the best this, the best that. I have to have bought every game. And I think one of the things that I really like about the emergence of more indie games is also that we can get much cheaper games, and so, you know, your entry level isn't buying a £50 game with a £300 console. And because of the indie games, as well as we've talked about, using the limitations that they have, we're also experiencing, you know, like, I've just got a new gaming laptop so that my graphics card can actually keep up. But actually, like, a lot of the games I've been playing, I don't need that graphics card, because again, you know, we're able to have those different levels of experience. And I think it's really important to remember that the way in which those barriers are articulated by the industry. So Javier made a great point about how that changed so much with film, and, you know, the same could be said for TV. It used to be very elitist in terms of who had a television in their own home. Now, you know, most people have laptops, if not a specific gaming console. I'm a PC gamer, so as I say, even before upgrading to a very nice PC for gaming, there's workarounds and there's ways that you can do it, but the whole field can feel very exclusive. And I think, like, say, it has a long history of being very male dominated, and so it becomes exclusionary to people who don't identify as male, because there seems like there's that kind of gender segregation as well. So I kind of wanted to add that. But another thing that I was thinking was so I've only played the start of this game, and so within like games analysis, obviously we kind of look at things in terms of ludic or narrative, and look at how there can be elements of ludonarrative dissonance where your play style doesn't really fit with the narrative. So because I've only played the beginning of Chicken Police, to me it seems like much more of a narrative driven game where the kind of ludic technologies and devices are sort of more simplistic in terms of, as I say, being more kind of point and click and discovery through that. So I was just wondering, for anyone who's played more of the game, can you enlighten me as to whether there are kind of more different ludic elements to it, more different sort of playable aspects to it, or whether it does stay more in that kind of narrative realm?
Well, so far, the milestone was chapter 1, and I will only mention until that point. I have only seen another mechanic where you connect the dots, where you connect the evidence. And that part is a bit lighter in terms of dialogue. It's basically just Sonny in his office with different items that he has researched previously. However, the main part in terms of hours is, as you well said, just making choices in the dialogue by point and click.
The game stays. Sorry, Amanda, just a quick one. So the game stays formulaic, so to speak, but to be fair, most games do, right? There's very few games can afford a genre change or whatever throughout. I think that. So there are mini games and whatever. I'm not the biggest fan of that in any adventure game, but there are those to spice things up. But I think the story has some nice twists and turns along the way. Sorry, Amanda, you were about to say something.
Sure. Of course, this is part of the narrative, but there's the interrogation tactic, and I actually didn't quite understand when I got my rating at the end why my questions or order of questions just weren't landing with that character. Like, we would actually talk about, like, okay, he said that he should play hardball, but I don't really think any of these questions are playing hardball. Or like, oh, why did I lose points for that? That's the only place where this game for me fell a little bit flat, is I wanted to feel like if I'm failing the interrogation tactic, I want feedback as to why, and I kind of want to be like, oh yeah, that's why that was the wrong thing to say to her. I feel like in every interrogation we did, and I think we did about 3, that I was just coming out of it being like, well, I guess we got 3 out of 5. I don't really know why. Like,
yeah.
So that's I'll go ahead and say that's a very adventure game thing. So I grew up playing point and click adventures. That was my whole thing, because I had really terrible PCs and that was all I could play. So you have what a lot of people just call adventure game logic, and I feel like it's a lot less here than it is in older games. You have the Sierra games, which are completely obscure. You can have.
Yours is my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's be real here. You can have 5 different solutions, but you have to think of the exact solution that the developer thought of. And, like, you have a rake and you have a bamboo pole, and you could use the bamboo pole to get something down off a high shelf, or you could use the rake. And you got to use the rake because you got to use the bamboo pole later on, even though it's completely reusable and you could have just had 1 item when instead you decided to have 2 or 3. But yeah, that's one failing, I think, of a lot of adventure games, is you have to be on the exact wavelength of the developer. And if you're not, you're going to run into problems later on. And like I said, I think Chicken Police does a better job of this than with some. But yeah, and I don't remember there being too many, like, action sequences like a lot of adventure games tried to throw in. Because I feel like there was a phase where adventure games were almost afraid to be adventure games. they were almost afraid of their own format, and so they wanted to throw in these action sequences to kind of keep you engaged. One of the big examples of this is Snatcher, where you have these weird, hard segments where you got to like shoot things, and up until now I've been playing a visual novel point and click sort of thing.
Yeah, the dissonance there could be very aggressive, as Poppy was saying.
Yeah.
And I certainly wasn't trying to suggest, they're just very different game experiences, right? Games that focus more on narrative and games that incorporate different playstyles. I don't think, I certainly wasn't trying to suggest a hierarchy or that Chicken Police should have done anything different. Because I only played a bit, I was just wondering.
Yeah, no worries. But I'd like to know, Poppy, by the way, have you experienced this dissonance so far in what you've played in this game?
In Chicken Police, specifically?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of any examples.
Because so far the dissonance would be more about, instead of the mechanic, it would be for me so far, like Amanda was saying, the feedback, the lack of feedback. That I know that so many adventure games lack feedback. However, I would really like it because so many other things are so organic, well integrated, except maybe the interrogation. But I'm not sure if you have reached that part, Poppy. I think not, right?
No, I haven't reached that part. I think the one thing that I was going to say, which is kind of goes back to when we were talking about it in as a kind of film noir piece, or I'm sorry, I can't remember who mentioned it in relation to Sin City. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was how it's a really interesting narrative device, but it's kind of a strange game device. The kind of recap at the end of each sort of little bit where, so when Sonny goes into somewhere and then he has a little, almost like what you would imagine like a camera piece, like an internal monologue. And I think that reminded me a lot of Sin City and the kind of, you would expect that to be kind of Clive Owen explaining something. And I think that, is a really interesting narrative device and works really well in the game, I think. But it does... I was just going to say, but it does
I'm sorry.
change the game style. Sorry, you go on.
Oh, I interrupted like 3 times. I'm sorry. Did you finish? Yeah, no, I was just gonna agree. I thought that was a great mechanic, and actually, back on the feedback that you were talking about, so they use it. Sometimes the little narrative bits where he spikes the camera and he explains, "Oh, I got her on the ropes now. I gotta keep pushing in this way," and they're a little bit jarring. I think they're effective. I mean, noir is all about the narrator. So I think that's great, I'm sure they're like, this is too much, but one of the ways they could have bridged that gap a little bit is to have be like, okay, well, that was too much, I shouldn't do that.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that during the interrogation, at no point did I realize I was going in the wrong direction until I saw the little detective meter go down, and I was like, but why did it go down? I'm doing what you told me to. But going back to those little cutscenes, I actually think those are my favorite parts of the game because they're extraordinarily well written. And secondly, just the way they sort of shoot the chickens in the car, there's something so funny about it. And,
they're brilliantly done, and I think they work really well for the game. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think it works well.
So, something that I think is also important to remember is that people engage with games differently from a lot of other media in that you don't sit down and play it start to finish a lot of times. A lot of times they include those recaps because you may be saving and coming back, and especially in an investigative game where you're trying to follow a narrative thread, it can be really handy to have those sorts of recaps so you're constantly following the story. It's not uncommon for a person to sit down and play a game for 20, 30 minutes, all right, now I gotta go to work, I'll come back, I'll finish it later. Whereas I think that there's more of an expectation with movies or with books that you're going to enjoy this in a nice large chunk. You're going to be able to kind of digest what you're seeing, whereas you may not always get that with games. And so, I've been playing Deadly Premonition again, and it does a very similar sort of thing. Alan Wake does a very similar sort of thing. And I feel like a lot of gamers are confused by the idea of, why is it telling me all of the stuff that literally just happened in front of me? And I think that when you have a game that is so built around that mystery and that narrative experience, it's important to make sure the gamers aren't necessarily lost if they have to, leave and pick this back up later.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting way that Chicken Police did it, because obviously in a lot of games you get that through the kind of in-game journaling system, which obviously Chicken Police has as well. And I am definitely one of those people who needs a reminder about what on earth I've been doing. I've been playing the Shadow of the Tomb Raider recently and keep picking it back up and going, I've got no idea where I'm going, where I came from, what I'm doing. But yeah, I think the way that it's stylized that to fit with the film noir aspect was, really, really well done.
Indeed. Maybe it could be...
It is very self-reflective. Like, film noir, like, you'll have the main character, she was a dame like none other. And, like, they would just kind of go on and on, like, that's who you are, Like, it really works in this. But it also serves a purpose. So it's kind of like, yeah, it could,
Yeah, in this case, I believe we feel more how... there are, let's say, smaller scenes, and we have this recap. We feel more emphasis on the recap because the scenes are so small sometimes. But fortunately, it is very diegetic, as you were saying. It is part of film noir. That's why, for me at least, it is more working than it is maybe being superfluous. In that sense, I believe that maybe we can play a bit more for our next conversation, because I feel we're excited to see what happens with this crime.
Yeah, especially having heard some potential spoilers, I'm like, oh god, I need to, I need to catch up.
I was going to say, Poppy, that I hoped we hadn't spoiled you too much, but it is...
No, it was spoiled in a very intriguing way. So,
okay, because I feel many of us were like trying not to spoil things, but next time I'm pretty sure that we can go deeper into the actual plot. However, I'm not sure if someone has maybe finished the game, so you can tell us what would be a next milestone. Because I haven't played. This is the very first time I'm playing it. Imre, have you finished it or haven't you? Yeah? So what do you think? Should it be the end of chapter 2? I believe most of us are checking out the extra scenes, so it is a lot of time to actually play completely a chapter. Maybe something before the chapter 2 ends?
Yeah, probably. Maybe I think you can go a bit further than that. This chapter's not. I think the whole game. I'm a slow player, right? And even for me, I think it was under 10 hours. I think.
Because just for me, chapter 1 was 3 hours.
Yeah, we're at like 2.2 or 3, and we haven't finished chapter 1.
Yeah.
I think it's best if you measure it by chapter, probably, and just go for the next one. I think.
So we should start, all of us, I believe, chapter 2, but we shouldn't finish it. Inside chapter 2, is there a scene that you would recommend to us, Imre, to arriving to that scene, chapter 2? A plot point, maybe? We can...
Sorry, not really. But look, I think if I recall, the whole game is like... I think it has only like 5 chapters or something. So by end of second chapter, we're gonna get to quite a lot of the game. To be honest.
So maybe
and that's always the way we've done it. I would just go chapter by chapter, and we'll see where we are with it.
Because I worry that, for example, with Poppy, if I say let's finish chapter 2 for next session, she will have a lot to play, because chapter 1 there is still so much.
I'm playing. Look, same time. When are we next meeting?
It would be on 2 Sundays. So it would be on Sunday 30, something like that. It is Sunday 29th. Yeah.
I'm sure I can do some detecting in the meantime.
I think
I'm happy,
yeah.
happy for people to spoil it for me if
it has to be very sustainable. So if you guys are all okay, we can finish chapter 2, because it is so enjoyable. And I believe that even though it can be a bit long sometimes, or surprisingly long for me, I enjoy that mechanically it is very light. And that's what I need in my adult life right now. Something more relaxed. Okay, so it was very enjoyable to start discussing with you guys. Hey.
Oh.
A cutie.
I strongly believe that with our different mindsets, with our different roles in the industry, we can get some interesting new ideas, questions that sometimes we would never see. So great to see you guys, and have a
It's been great.
have a great
Look forward
Sunday.
to seeing you again in a few weeks.
Absolutely.
See y'all next time.
Yep.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot.